You were never unworthy. And you never looked away.
Ash Hollow, Wyoming Territory, 1877. The stagecoach wheels groaned like tired bones as it rolled through the dust-choked street, trailing a curtain of grit behind it. The late sun bled red across the sky, setting the horizon on fire as the coach rocked to a halt near the old water trough. Flies buzzed, dogs barked, and shutters creaked. Townsfolk peered from their porches, their rocking chairs slowing, their conversations freezing midward. When the door opened, a pair of worn leather boots touched the ground first. Then came the hem of a travel-worn gray skirt, and finally, the figure of a woman descended, stiff-backed, gloved hands steady, though her breath caught sharp against the dry air. A thin veil, pale as frost, draped from the brim of her bonnet, shielding her face from curious eyes. She didn't say a word, just lifted a small trunk with one hand and clutched a folded letter in the other, its edges soft from too much handling. Her name, Clara Whitlow, was written in ink that had long since begun to fade. Children stopped chasing a hoop down the street. One little boy, mud-smeared and barefoot, stared openly before his sister yanked him away. Behind a barrel, two women whispered fast and low. "She's the one." "What one?" "The scarred bride." A screen door slapped shut. Boots shuffled back inside stores. Clara stood alone. The coachman tipped his hat to no one in particular, snapped the reins, and drove off, leaving her behind in the dust. She began walking, unsure of where to go, the dry wind tugging at her skirt and making the veil flicker against her cheek. Every step felt like an echo in a place that didn't want echoes. People looked, then looked away. Some with pity, others with discomfort, one with a sneer. She stopped at the edge of the town square where a broken stone fountain sat dry and cracked, its basin littered with leaves and the bones of birds. Clara sat on the rim and placed a letter in her lap. The ink was smudged, but the words still etched themselves into her like scars. "I'll be waiting at Ash Hollow. You won't be alone no more. Yours, Thomas Loren." She had memorized every word before she ever boarded the coach. She knew the rhythm of them like a prayer. But Thomas wasn't here, and no one had stepped forward. At the edge of town, past the stables and beyond the saloon, the clang of iron echoed inside a dim forge. A rhythmic sound, steady, deliberate, unhurried. Elias Boone didn't look up as his hammer struck the glowing horseshoe on the anvil. His bad leg dragged slightly when he shifted, the result of a mine shaft caving in 2 winters ago. His left hand no longer closed tight around the tools like it used to, but his right, his good hand, still wielded the hammer with grace and purpose. His young apprentice, Jed, peeked out the window. "Did you hear, Mr. Boone? That mail-order bride came today. The one folks been talking on. Scarred up, they say. Fire or something. Elias paused, let the hiss of the iron in the trough fill the room. "People talk too much," he said vinily. "Scars are just proof you lived." Back in town, dusk deepened into shadow. The lanterns lit on porches now flickered like fireflies, casting long silhouettes across the street. Clara had not moved from the fountain. Her trunk sat untouched beside her. Her veil, damp with sweat and dust, fluttered weakly in the wind. She stood, squared her shoulders, and walked to the sheriff's office. The door creaked open, and Sheriff Manders looked up from his whiskey. He was a thick man with permanent sunburn on his neck and a mustache stained with tobacco. "You Clara Whitlow?" She nodded, voice brittle. "I received a letter from Thomas Loren," he said. The sheriff cut her off with a grunt and reached into a drawer, pulling out a second, unopened letter. He shoved it across the desk. "Loren lit out of here near 3 weeks back. Said he wanted a pretty wife. Guess he didn't mean you." She stared at him. "There a place I can stay?" she asked. He scratched the side of his nose. "We got a cot in the back supply room. It ain't fancy." "I don't need fancy," she whispered. "Just honest." He led her back without another word. She laid her trunk down, unfolded a thin blanket, and sat on the cot in silence. The walls smelled like oil and old paper. That night, the sky above Ash Hollow filled with stars, sharp and endless. Clara walked the dusty road toward the Black Hills beyond the town. The wind whispered through the sagebrush like voices too tired to speak clearly. She stood there a long while, looking out toward the open plains. She could have kept walking, could have vanished into the dark like so many others who came west with dreams and found only silence. But something in her bones, turned her back. On her return, The streets were mostly empty, save for the soft, drunken laughter spilling out of the saloon. Clara walked faster, eyes down, arms clutching her coat tighter around her. She was halfway to the sheriff's office when the laughter spilled into the street. 3 men, cowboys half drunk, half mean, stepped out in front of her. Their boots scuffed the dirt. "Well now," one said, grinning like a dog without a leash. "Ain't you the mystery lady come all this way to get turned down?" Clara didn't answer. "But you got more under that veil than you're letting on," another said, stepping closer. "Maybe she's a witch," the third jeered. "Or maybe just real ugly." He reached out and snatched the veil. The wind held still. Then came the sound of steel, not a blade, but something heavier, deeper. A hammer slammed into the dirt beside the man's boot, cracking the earth inches from his toes. The cowboy staggered back. From the shadows of the alley stepped a tall figure. His shirt was streaked with soot, his hands black with iron and ash. His eyes, hard, quiet, steady, gleamed under the moonlight. "That woman's under my protection now," Elias Boone said, his voice like thunder over the prairie. Silence fell. The cowboys, unsure, exchanged glances, then slunk back toward the saloon with muttered curses and cowards' laughter. Clara didn't move. Her veil hung from her hand. The moonlight traced every scar on the right side of her face, silvering them into something beautiful and tragic and unflinching. Elias looked at her, really looked, and didn't flinch. "Come on," he said gently. "Town's got teeth, but I know a place with fire and quiet." She nodded once and followed him through the shadows, the hammer still glinting at his side. The mornings in Ash Hollow always began with the sound of iron. A steady rhythm like a heartbeat in steel, slow, deliberate, and alive. The forge behind Elias Boone's cabin breathed smoke and heat, a world of sparks and sweat and silence. Clara moved through it like a ghost made real, sweeping ash from the corners, sorting tools by size, folding rags, and washing the soot from the workbench with care that made no noise. They didn't speak much at first, but they didn't need to. Elias hammered, Clara cleaned. Elias grunted at the stubborn hinge he was shaping. Clara refilled the trough. Between them was a strange kind of stillness, not awkward, not strained, but sturdy, like an old fence holding up in a windstorm. Their silences didn't weigh them down, they held them steady. On the 4th morning, Clara woke to something unexpected. Folded neatly on the corner of her cot lay a small iron rose. Its petals were curled with surprising delicacy, blackened but graceful. The stem bent just slightly at the base, as if it had grown there. There was no note. Just iron. Just care. She touched it with her fingertips, and the metal was cool. But something in her chest warmed in reply. That same afternoon, she found Elias struggling with his left hand again. The old wound from the mine collapse had left it twisted, the finger stiff, the wrist unreliable. He cursed under his breath as he tried to clamp a piece of hot steel, his grip failing again and again. "Let me," Clara said, her voice soft but firm. He paused, surprised. She stepped closer, taking a strip of clean cloth from the shelf. She didn't ask permission, just gently took his hand and began to wrap it with quiet efficiency. Her touch was light, but the tenderness in it struck him harder than any blow. When she finished, she looked up. "That should hold better." Elias cleared his throat. "Thank you." "You're welcome." As the week wore on, something unspoken grew between them. Not romance. Not yet. Something older. Truer. Like the bones of something that had survived fire. One afternoon, Clara sat on the bench outside the forge, the rose cradled in her hands, her fingers tracing the ridges again and again. The wind had picked up, and dust curled in slow whirlwinds down the street. "My scars," she said suddenly, not looking at him. "They're not the worst thing people see." Elias paused mid-swing. She continued, her voice distant. "It's that I still hoped. That I still came. That I still believed someone might see me and not look away." The forge crackled behind him. He set down his hammer and turned, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his sleeve. "Hope," he said, "is the bravest thing left." She looked up. Their eyes met for the first time that day, and neither looked away. But Ash Hollow was a place slow to forget, and even slower to forgive what it didn't understand. Word spread. Whispers thickened. At the general store, Clara stood at the counter with a small sack of flour and a few coins clutched in her hand. Mr. Griggs didn't even glance at her as he said, "Store's closed," though the door still swung wide behind her. A preacher's wife, tall and tightly laced, passed Clara in the street and said loud enough for others to hear, "Boone's too kind to damage things. It'll ruin him." Elias didn't argue. He didn't explain. He simply built. He taught Clara how to hold the hammer, how to angle the iron, how to listen to the hiss of water as red-hot metal cooled into something useful. They worked together under the endless Wyoming sky. She shaped hinges and crooked nails. He corrected her grip with patient hands. One afternoon, her hammer slipped sideways and knocked a full bucket of water off the bench. It soaked them both, extinguishing the forge's edge in a great hiss. For a moment, silence. Then Clara started laughing. Really laughing. Deep and unguarded. Elias blinked, then chuckled, then laughed with her, loud and alive, like the sound had been locked inside him for years. Later that night, by the dying fire, Elias stared into the coals. His voice was quiet. "I had a brother," he said. "Samuel. He was younger, faster, better at everything." Clara listened. "When the mine collapsed, he pushed me out first. The whole thing came down right after. He died screaming. I lived. He looked down at his bad hand, and I never knew why." Clara reached out slowly, her fingers brushing the edge of his wrist. "Maybe so you could help someone else," she said, "who didn't know why either." He didn't answer, but his eyes glistened with something sharp and unshed. He didn't pull his hand away. The next day dawned strange. A rider came in from the west, fast and smug, the kind of gallop that made people turn their heads. His coat was fine, his boots polished. His face, handsome in a cruel, unfinished way, grinned like it owned the world. Clara stood frozen outside the forge as he dismounted. "Well, I'll be damned," the men said, loud and theatrical. "You're still here." Her throat dried. "Thomas Lorne," she whispered. He walked closer, spurs clicking. "I figured you'd crawl back to whatever hole you came from," he said. "Didn't think you'd hang around here playing wife to a cripple." Elias stepped out of the forge. His fists were clenched. His jaw was stone. Lorne sneered. "What? You gonna beat me with your bad hand?" But before Elias could speak, Clara stepped forward. Her hand touched Elias's wrist. Her voice, though quiet, cut through the air like glass. "He's not worth your scars." Elias blinked. Lorne laughed. "You serious? I only wrote to win a bet. You should have burned that letter with the rest of your face." Clara didn't flinch. Elias didn't move. But in that stillness, a storm was rising. Thomas Lorne strutted through Ash Hollow like a fox among hens, smiling wide and talking louder than necessary. His voice carried through the streets and into the shops, dragging whispers behind it like burrs on a coat. He told anyone who'd listened that Clara Whitlow had deceived him, that she'd misrepresented herself in her letters, that she'd omitted the truth of her scars. He used words like fraud and humiliation, and said he'd take her to court, said he'd run her out of town, and let the law make an example of her. People listened. Some nodded. Some turned away. At the sheriff's office, Manders rubbed his jaw and muttered, "If there's truth to it, she might have to leave. I can't get mixed up in disputes like this." Clara stood silent in the doorway, the wind catching the hem of her dress, her face unflinching. She had heard worse, survived worse. Elias Boone said nothing. He simply walked to his forge and shut the door behind him. For hours, the hammer rang. No small shaping, no delicate bends. Just thunder, iron struck with purpose, with fury, with care. Clara sat nearby, quiet, the sound wrapping around her like a heartbeat. That evening, with a lantern glowing beside her and her hand shaking only slightly, she wrote a new letter. This time not to a stranger. Not for love or mercy or marriage, but for truth. She told her story in ink. The fire that had taken half her face and nearly all her childhood. The years she'd spent hiding in shadows, silenced by shame. The way she had kept hoping. The letter ended simply. "I came to Ash Hollow believing I could be chosen. I stayed because I chose myself." She gave it to a courier bound for the next town, where the newspaper would print it for anyone who cared enough to read. 3 days passed. Then came a knock. Not on the forge. Not on the sheriff's door. On the cabin. A widow from the outskirts brought a fresh loaf of sourdough and didn't speak a word. Just nodded once and left. Later, the rancher's wife, the one with silver hair and arthritic hands, came with a shawl, soft and warm and patched with old cloth. By week's end, Clara's name was on every tongue, but this time not in whispers. At the forge, Elias shaped something small. He spent hours on it, brow furrowed, eyes focused not just on the metal, but on the meaning in his hands. One evening, just after sunset, he handed it to her. A hand mirror, framed in twisted iron, blackened and strong. The glass shimmered in the firelight, imperfect but honest. "This one," he said, "doesn't lie." Clara held it, hesitant at first. Her reflection wavered in the flickering light of the forge. The lines of her face, the smooth and the ruined, met her gaze. For once, she didn't look away. She wasn't pretty. She was real. Whole. "Every mark on you," Elias whispered, "tells a story I want to spend my life reading." Her voice caught. "Do you really see me?" His answer came without pause. "Better than anyone ever has." The next day broke quiet, until the saloon doors banged open and the boots of 2 deputies clomped across the square. Behind him rode Lorne, high in the saddle, arrogance billowing off him like dust. He dismounted slow, drawing attention. Every step calculated. Clara stood in front of the forge, her posture straight, her eyes locked. "I've filed notice," Lorne announced. "She'll be removed for fraud. Sheriff says he'll enforce it if no one else will." People gathered, like they always did when things threatened to break. Elias stepped forward, sleeves rolled, face calm. "I made something," he said. He walked to the edge of the square where the old dry fountain sat, cracked, useless, forgotten. He pulled the sheet away. There, bolted to the stone, gleamed a new plaque, iron polished to deep shine, letters etched with steady hand. "Clara Whitlow, Heart of Ash Hollow." The crowd murmured. Lorne laughed, a scoffing sound. "What's that supposed to mean?" The sheriff arrived, huffing and red-faced, hat in hand. He looked at Elias, at the crowd, at Clara, then at Lorne. "She's one of us now," he said simply. Lorne looked around and saw no allies. Not the grocer, not the preacher's wife, not even the barkeep who once poured him free drinks. The silence closed in, tight, final. Without another word, he turned, mounted his horse, and rode out. His dust didn't settle for a long while. That evening, the sun dipped low, and golden light stretched across the dirt and wood and rust of Ash Hollow. Clara stepped out of the forge wearing a simple dress she'd sewn herself, her hair pulled back, no bonnet, no veil. She took Elias's hand, fingers interlocking with quiet certainty. They walked the main street slow and steady, heads turning as they passed. Not out of pity, not out of gossip, out of respect. When they reached the fountain, Clara paused. The plaque caught the sunlight just so. Her name gleamed. She stared at it for a long moment, then looked at Elias. "In a town that cast her aside," she whispered, more to herself than to him, "one broken blacksmith saw what no one else could." Elias squeezed her hand gently, and in his eyes, she was never scarred at all.